What are the best performance enhancing supplements for ultra athletes? There are 3 supplements that I regularly recommend to these people. One of them is dietary nitrate, and this is commonly supplemented in the form of beetroot juice or concentrated beetroot juice. And the reason that this is helpful is that nitrate acts as a precursor to the formation of a gas named nitric oxide in your body. And nitric oxide promotes blood flow and has a variety of other effects too. The reason that this is relevant is that there are various changes that take place in your muscles during exercise that increase use of nitric oxide. And these changes include decrease in muscle pH, so your muscles become more acidic, and also changes in blood flow and the availability of oxygen. And so by increasing nitric oxide availability, nitrate supplementation in the form of beetroot juice can reduce the oxygen cost of exercise, which is likely to boost performance. But interestingly, it has also been shown to increase the efficiency by which your mitochondria, or the energy powerhouses of your cells, can produce energy. And as an aside, there's also a little bit of research showing that beetroot supplementation can boost performance in shorter duration, more explosive exercise too. And as a bonus, it seems to be good for health in general. If you want to supplement it and you're a high performance athlete, then you probably need at least 6 millimoles of nitrate from beetroot. That corresponds to about 370 milligrams of nitrate, and there are some commercially available beetroot juice shots that are appropriate for that purpose. You want to take it perhaps 2 to 3 hours or so before the bout of exercise. And one thing to note is that you need the bacteria on your tongue to convert the nitrate in beetroot juice into nitric oxide ultimately. So if you use it, then you don't want to use mouthwash around that time. So that might sound esoteric, but it's actually really important. Using mouthwash will offset the positive effects of supplementation. Another supplement that I regularly recommend is creatine monohydrate. And while most people think about creatine as something that people take when they're trying to get big and strong, there are many reasons that it can benefit ultra athletes too. One of these is that creatine draws water into your muscle cells. And what that means is that if you're prone to insufficient hydration, for example, if you're competing in the heat, then creatine can help you maintain your performance. Another effect of creatine is to boost the energy status of your brain, specifically increasing brain phosphocreatine stores. The relevance of that is that when you're awake for long periods of time, as you're likely to be during ultra events, your brain's ATP levels, adenosine triphosphate levels, might start to dwindle over time. And by increasing your brain's phosphocreatine stores, those phosphate groups can be used to rephosphorylate ATP, maintaining the energy state of your brain, and that can positively affect both mental performance and physical performance during extended wakefulness. And then finally, creatine also tends to help with recovery after exercise. So if you are doing a multi-day event, then creatine might be beneficial. To supplement creatine, take 5 grams per day, probably with breakfast. And it's best to take it with some carbohydrate at the same time, because carbohydrate can improve creatine uptake by various bodily tissues. And I suggest supplementing with creatine for several weeks before the event too, because that way you'll saturate your muscle and brain phosphocreatine stores, maximizing the benefits that you experience as a result of creatine supplementation. And then finally, there is caffeine. of all the different supplements for endurance athletes that have been studied, caffeine arguably reigns supreme. And there are many reasons that we include caffeine in energize and rebuild versions of long-range fuel. So I'll touch on some of those here. One is that caffeine improves performance in practically all types of exercise, from very short duration, high intensity explosive activities, including lifting weights and sprinting, to intermittent sprint exercise, and of course, endurance and ultra endurance events too. Caffeine also improves many aspects of cognition, including reaction time and alertness, and it can boost mood as well. So all of those things are relevant to ultra athletes, but caffeine really comes into its own during extended wakefulness. And in many ultra activities, people who complete the events fastest often have the least sleep. So there's actually an onus on getting as little sleep as possible. And by offsetting sleepiness, caffeine can boost performance. So if you want to realize these beneficial effects of caffeine, then the question is, what dose should you use? And while for shorter duration activities, higher dose of caffeine, maybe 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight, seem to be best. For ultra athletes, more regular doses of 1 to 2 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight are probably closer to optimal. And one thing to remember is that caffeine does reduce sleepiness, and consumed in large quantities too close to sleep can interfere with sleep. So if you're planning on napping for, let's say, more than an hour or so, or even if you have a whole night of sleep, then you want to cap your caffeine intake by a certain amount of time before you plan to sleep. So I'd suggest probably stopping consuming caffeine 6 hours or so before you plan to sleep, although that number is very variable between people because some people are very caffeine sensitive and others really aren't. So don't consume it too close to your planned nap or planned sleep. But otherwise, there are all sorts of reasons to think that it's likely to benefit you. I hope that you find those tips helpful, and for more information about nutrition for ultra endurance events in general, check out our blog, How to Fuel for an Ultra Marathon, which, while running specific, contains lots of information that's relevant to all ultra endurance athletes.